Hello, everybody. I feel like it's been a hot minute since we've actually done one of these about a movie, but today, Malik and I are going to discuss Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Both of us have seen the movie once by now. I saw it yesterday. Malik has just got back from the theater, so this is going to be a pretty interesting discussion. I have a lot of thoughts about this movie, and my plan is actually to put on my channel like a video I've already recorded and one that I will record after I see it a second time and see how the two viewings compare. So this will be an interesting bridge. But just before we started, Malik, you were talking about your theater experience. So I guess pick up from there. How was it for you?
So going in, uh, I had the feeling, not even necessarily. Well, yeah, I guess I would say the feeling that this would probably end up being the best Phase Four film, um, and I think it is. Um, while I was sitting in the Uber riding on the way back to my place, I was hopscotching between is it though, or is Shang-Chi a little better? And by the time I opened the door and got in to my house, I was like, you know what? Yeah, I would say this is honestly the best movie that they've made in Phase Four. Um, I really liked it. I really liked it. I don't know if the movie itself is necessarily better than the first movie. Um, I don't even like playing the trivializing comparison game, but just getting my honest thoughts out there. I really really enjoyed it. I when I watched the movie when I watched the first movie for the first time, I remember thinking, okay, Letitia Wright is good in this little side role. I don't know if I ever want to see her as Black Panther because I don't know if she can carry a whole film as the lead. Boy, was that stupid. Boy, was that dumb. She was awesome. She was great in this movie. There's only one line reading from her that I distinctly didn't like, and I think it's less because of how she said the line and more because the line was even there. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but in the big climactic third act action scene when she has Namor trapped in one of her transports, and she's got the heat blazing
Oh
in there.
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I had that same thought.
Yeah, that was so goofy. I'm like, you didn't even need that exchange. Why is that there? But literally everything else other than that, I thought she was great. She stepped up to the plate in a big way. I can't even imagine the pressure, the real life. It's interesting because there's a lot of discourse out there in the MCU fandom of recast T'Challa. Why do we have to lose the character just because the actor died? And I understand that, but I think it was very smart on Ryan Coogler's part to just make that the main focus of this movie. Like, just lean into it. Like, yes, the actor died, so in turn the character dies, and we're going to like have the characters grieving and going through trying to cope with his death in a way that the actors actually are, to such a degree where it's like, how much acting are they really doing? Um, but I thought it was beautiful in that way. Like, it was. I can imagine for him and everyone involved, this was a very therapeutic, surreal, and kind of crazy movie to make because obviously Ryan Coogler talked about this. Like, originally he had like a whole thing with proper T'Challa planned, and like he's been gone for so long and having to deal with the kingdom that's been functioning without him, and he then had to scrap all of that and rewrite it around a very real death around a person he was very close to. And this movie just treated that with so much care, so much reverence. Um, there's also like some humor sprinkled throughout that didn't like compromise the weighty
Mm-hmm.
emotional tone that the majority of the movie exists in. Which I thought was really impressive, especially given the majority of Phase Four content that we've gotten recently. From all accounts, from every. Okay, I will say, I mean, this is a, I feel kind of, well, not even a hollow complaint, but to be expected when the stuff about the visual effects artist was coming out and like how Marvel was working them to the bone. I wasn't impressed with the visual effects in some moments. I thought they could have been cleaned up and done a little better. But for the most part, this movie looks beautiful. The acting is incredible. The action's pretty solid in places, even stronger than the first movie. Um, the biggest shock to me was that we brought Michael B. Jordan back in a way that was awesome, made so much sense for the story. Because when we got the scene where she was taking the black herb, I was like, okay, they're not gonna do like a CGI deep fake uh,
Yeah, that's not gonna
Chadwick Boseman.
happen.
So I'm like, how are they gonna do this? And then they just sidestep that and go to Michael B. Jordan, which made so much sense for where Shuri was as a character. That she's like so mired and rooted in vengeance and selfishness. And that scene was brilliant. Michael B. Jordan killed it. I'm so glad they were able to bring him back in a way that didn't undermine his death, but was so purposeful and authentic. I really really enjoyed that. That blew my mind. I had to contain myself from squealing when I saw it. Uh, yeah. So overall, great movie. Really strong finish to Phase Four of the MCU, and I can't wait to see where they go from here. So just take it away.
Yes, this is going to be really interesting because I absolutely agree that this is a great movie, but I've been sort of like the thing that I've been stuck on since I've seen it has been I feel like this is going to work a lot better for me on repeat viewings because right now my thoughts if asked to like compare it to the rest of phase 4 or compare it to the first movie is like I think I definitely prefer the first movie still, and I think there are a couple of projects in phase 4 that do it more for me than this does, and the reason is like not typically the kind of thing that bothers me when I see these, but it had a lot to do with the editing and how I think that affected the pacing. Where, like, to sum it up in a sentence, I think this is a masterpiece of a 3 hour movie that got cut down to a still really good, but not as good 2 hour, 40-minute movie. And I think the perfect version of this movie for me is one that would have just let itself be 3 hours because there's a lot of scenes throughout where we cut away and I'm like, huh, if you'd have just held for like a few more seconds, that would have been perfect. But the way that we cut to something completely different just kind of took me out. And that happened a lot, like consistently throughout the movie. And it's such a not me thing to get hung up on, but I couldn't help it. But to like swing back around to the positives, I think all of what you mentioned as far as Shuri being a convincing lead and like the way that they go about handling Chadwick's death and T'Challa's death, I think that all ties into each other and what I think makes this movie really interesting and unique, which is like for starters, when we were having like the discourse wide discussion of like, do you recast T'Challa or not? Something that I think everyone kind of neglected to factor into that conversation, and that includes me, is that however it's not something where you can separate like how do you handle the death of Chadwick Boseman from how do you handle this as a movie, because like you said, the people making this movie were Chadwick Boseman's friends and like people he was close to, and unless you just want to get a completely different team of people working on this movie, then there we just have to like take them when they make the choice that works for them emotionally, because it's not something that you can just separate into the
Yeah,
character and the actor in like two different camps so cleanly.
absolutely. Because if you, I don't know, and because Ryan Coogler was honestly thinking about stepping away from making movies altogether after he lost Chad, I don't know if you can convince him to do this movie if you're
Mhm.
demanding a recast.
Yeah, and to tie that into the movie itself, I actually spoke a little bit with Eden and Mom about this movie because they both saw it last night, and Mom and I have the same thing. Where like we don't think of this as Black Panther 2. We think of it as like Wakanda Forever, almost a separate thing from Black Panther because the two movies are very similar in a lot of ways, but they feel so different. And the thing that makes Wakanda Forever feel very different to me is how completely the movie shares in Shuri's grief and specifically her anger. And I find that so interesting that this movie, I think, feels very angry, feels a little bit more, not even a little bit more, a lot more cynical than the first film, but it doesn't feel mean about it. It just feels like a very natural sort of like the first movie had this like really palpable idealism, and that was kind of the whole point.
Hmm.
And it's been years and we've suffered losses in between then and now, and like the world is different, and the movie is much more wary. And I think when we get to like the conflict with Shuri and Namor and bringing Michael B. Jordan in, bringing Killmonger back, I think this movie like sympathizes with their kind of like shared bitterness more than the first film did. And the first film already sympathized with Killmonger a fair bit. But this movie is really like, no, we get where he's coming from. Like all of our major players share in this like deep, deep distrust and anger born from all of this loss. And like, well, what has the world done for me lately? And I think it's like a masterful like approach to tone to be able to have that be throughout the movie, I'd say up through to the very end, and not have it feel like unpleasant at any point.
And at the same time work in some levity here and there that
Mhm.
doesn't undercut any of that. It's such a masterful balancing act.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know, I just that's it's the thing where like what brings it below the first movie for me is nothing to do with like what's in it and everything to do with just sort of the flow, because that's something that I don't see a lot of people talk about in general, positive or negative, with like Marvel movies as a matter of course. And I think it's one
Mhm.
of those things where like they've been at this for over a decade and they've got it down to a science to like how to make these things like pace themselves out so like plot beats happen at exactly the right times, and like no one ever has cause to go like this movie felt like it went too fast or it felt like it dragged. They usually get the flow down to a science. And this one, I think, in a way that's a little bit unavoidable because part of that is just the messy sort of emotional aspect to it. It doesn't feel like it's prioritizing that as much. So I think the first movie is a tighter movie, and this one is a little bit more like a miasma. Like it's going to be really interesting to sift through it because it feels like more something you just have to let wash over you as opposed to like tackle it as a like super tight narrative, you know?
Yeah, I was debating with myself as I was watching it. This this doesn't really feel like it's interesting that you say that this feels like a 3-hour movie. Well, what should have been a 3-hour movie that they had to whittle down to 2 hours and 40 minutes. I like Everett Ross. I like how he's used here. Um, at the same time, he is debatably more of a plot device than a character, and I don't. I was debating with myself: do we really even need him, or did we bring him back just because he was in the first movie? Um,
That's interesting because I'd say he's more of a thematic device than a plot device. And I think we absolutely
just
do
just
need
to
him.
show that there is an American that isn't, even though they're running joke, they call him a colonizer, but he is the one guy outside of their civilization that is on their team, is looking out for them, is genuinely a good person that isn't fully committed to the interests of his country before he is, just trying to do what's morally good and decent to him.
And like the thing about it that makes that necessary and like ties into again the sort of anger of this movie is that I feel the point being made with him here is that that doesn't work. Like, the reason that you need him in this movie is because he is that good guy, and where we take his story is ultimately like we have Val, who's like the voice of colonization, saying like, could you imagine what America would do if it was the only country that has vibranium? I literally dream about that. I'm in charge, America first, like trying to fix the system from the inside the way that Ross tries to, it doesn't work. He has no option basically but to get out, because they're going to silence him, they're going to take him away because he's trying to do that decent thing, when the fact is, like America and like France and world powers, as we established throughout the movie, they are still unfortunately driven by that sort of like colonizer motivation of us first. And so I think we need that, because we need like in the present of the story, like a look at what's America doing, what's America's approach to this, because it feeds into like Shuri and Namor's angers. Like, this is still happening. Like, the problem has not been fixed.
And it it kind of not undermines, but interestingly kind of doesn't. It's a cynical take on T'Challa's choice at the end of the first movie to allow Wakanda to, in a way, open up their borders and say, like, you know what, it's time for the rest of the world to be exposed to us. We may be willing to, use vibranium in some sense here and there. Um, and then, of course, he dies. Wakanda, you know, Queen Ramonda
Ramonda, yeah.
isn't, yeah, isn't willing to, commit to the promises that her son made. Um, and for the very cynical but true reason that she sees what her son maybe either wasn't willing to see or had a shattering disillusionment about, the ethics of his own nation, and thought it would be better to be more open.
Yeah, it's like what Killmonger says. T'Challa was too noble. And there's a place for that, and the world benefits from noble people and like expressing nobility. But past a certain point, like, you look at the reality in front of you, and T'Challa was gone for 5 years, came back, and then died again almost immediately. And like, the world in his absence, like, showed the true colors are not exactly what he wishes they would be. And like, you combine that with the grief over his actual death, and like the state of the world in response to it, is like, imagine being in Ramonda's shoes, and like, your son is dead and you're trying to process that, but for the entire world outside of your country, his death is like a signifier for, all right, our turn to exploit you now. And that just creates this horrible loop of like this really like understandable, but it's this really, really toxic, like, just like animal, almost like attack, like, just defend yourself.
Um, I got two questions for you. How do you feel about Riri Williams, and how do you feel about Namor as an antagonist?
Let's start with Riri Williams, because I think, and this is another thing that might land better on a second viewing, but
Hmm.
like, for years now, the MCU has basically made like a common practice of, we've got a big character who's going to be a big deal down the line. Let's introduce them now as like a supporting character in this other thing. So we did that with America Chavez. We did that with Peter Parker. We did that with T'Challa himself in Civil War. And of the many examples of that kind of trope, I think Riri is one of the ones that works for me the least. Like, I appreciate the way that she factors into the plot, and that they have her here in a capacity that feels natural, but just like, on a pure characterization level, not a lot about her stuck out to me. Like, Dominique Thorne is very charismatic, but this is one of those few times where I'm not excited to see the Ironheart series after this movie. I'm more curious, to where, like, when we got, like, I was very excited to see T'Challa and to see Peter after I watch Civil War. I'm kind of excited to see where America Chavez pops up next. For Riri, I'm interested to see her show because I want a better feeling of like who this person is that I don't think I have yet.
Yeah, I mean, the actress is giving it all she's got in terms of charisma. But yeah, you're right. She feels more like. I mean, I didn't feel like it was horribly stereotypical, for lack of a better word, I guess. But
Mm.
she felt more like a typical archetype. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of like, especially since it's archetypes that we've seen already so many times in the MCU, like a young, very intelligent, sort of like spunky person, and it's just we have like little kernels of who she is beyond that, but I can't like grasp onto any of it, you know?
yeah, like we don't. This movie is too big and has too much going on to delve too deep into her, so I get it. Um, but yeah, that it's a fine introduction. It's not super strong. Like it would, it wouldn't. It definitely didn't make me a fan of this character I already wasn't a fan of.
Yeah. I feel like we're gonna have to wait on that for her actual show. But Namor though, Namor I freaking love. Like I am excited for the next time that Namor pops up. Because like Tana Huerta, that guy just he's got that absolute like asshole charisma that you're like, God, I hate you, but also you're so good and I want to see you more just forever. And like I hope that he becomes like a big part of the MCU going forward because he is so interesting. And we end with him in such a interesting place. So like he's absolutely the antagonist of this movie, but we don't end with him in what I'd call a villain position. Like I just want to know like what role could he play in the next story that he pops up in? Like I don't know.
I'm assuming, and I could be wrong. We probably won't see him again until Kang Dynasty.
That would be interesting. And it would make
But
sense.
yeah, so I really like him. I think he's brilliantly acted. Uh, what you're talking about in terms of the editing, that I could feel that in the big expository scene when we were doing flashbacks with him. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and some of what you were saying about the editing didn't ring true for me in other parts of the movie as well. Um, like I don't. It's interesting. Like I don't know if it's. I was conflicted in that I don't know if there really is anything because I was thinking like yeah this movie is a little long. Is there anything you can really cut out? No, not
I
really. I
can't
mean,
think of anything I'd take out.
yeah, like there isn't really anything you can cut. So maybe you're right. Maybe they just I don't know what more they would have been doing to flesh out. Maybe there are more Riri scenes that they had to flesh her out a little more. Uh, if that's the case, I would have bitten the bullet and just made this movie a little longer.
Yeah,
Because if this is where you're going to introduce her, I think it's important to have as strong of an impact with the audience as possible. Like we didn't you could get away with only doing essentially two scenes with Peter Parker in Civil War because everybody already loves Spider-Man, and if you got a good actor, you know you're pretty solid, which you know they were. So yeah, he has that one scene with Tony, and then the big action scene, and that's pretty much it. Here, like we don't know, we have no idea. Most of your audience has no concept of who this person is. Uh, so there's a lot more heavy lifting that you have to do to get people to care about her.
yeah. I don't think people who have never in their life heard of Ironheart are gonna leave this movie being like, "Oh, I'm a massive Ironheart fan now," which is a
Yeah.
shame.
But props to the actress because she's good at least. So they
Mhm.
have that going for them. And you know, it's by no means like a bad introduction. So
And you know,
there's
I've
only
been wrong about that kind of thing before, so who knows?
what do you mean?
Like that's like, oh, people aren't gonna like watch this movie and become Ironheart fans. I don't know. They might. I could be wrong about that.
Well, yeah. So with Namor, I thought the arc with him was pretty strong. The, there's some stuff I don't like about Namor. Uh, well, I say some stuff. There's really only two things. Uh, Mainly, so he's revered as a god, right?
Hmm.
And he makes very human mistakes that he's completely upfront with his people about, and there is like no questioning of any of that. He's like, yeah, I compromised us, and we're gonna go to Wakanda and make sure they don't expose us and this and that. I'm like, you're kind of showing your fallibility pretty strong here, bud. Like no one is questioning this. And then towards the end, he's got the one, I guess, lieutenant or whatever that is finally questioning his decision because it's like right after that, he literally brought the Wakandans into their home. They kill one of their people. They go to war with them, and then in an interaction none of the warriors are privy to, Shuri and him come to an understanding. He comes back. He's like, "Hey, stop. We're good now. I know we fought these people twice and they killed one of our own unprompted before the war even started, but we're good. Stop it." And I'm like,
Well, as
eh.
far as the first thing goes, I know that like living in Christian dominated America, it's like hard for either of us to sort of picture, not even picture, but like relate to cultures that have like a perception of God slash gods that are still fallible. But I think
Mhm.
it's a fairly common thing to have cultures that are like, yeah, we have gods and like they screw up sometimes. Like it's a thing that gods do, maybe even more than people. But for the second thing, I get where you're coming from with that, but I think that's a matter of it makes sense given the way that he explains it to his lieutenant, to where it's like, what was our like motivation for starting this fight in the first place? It's the rest of the world is gonna come for us, and we want Wakanda to pick a side. Like you're either with us or you're against us. And he's like, okay, I've got like the leader of Wakanda has sympathy for us now. Like by playing her game and like being like, okay, let's stop the fighting. I've got what I want, which is Wakanda on Talokan's side, ostensibly, especially since the rest of the world is still going to be against Wakanda. They're going to need our backup when the knife is at their backs, and so let's go along with this because it's really the most practical, pragmatic choice that benefits everybody. And by the end of this, with or without them, we are going to be on top.
Well, yeah, like I do like that the villain, even though he technically loses, still gets what he wants.
Yeah, he got the thing that he wanted by the start of the movie.
Um, so the other thing that I didn't like is just like a trivial thing in the big fight scene. So we did this we did this fake out with Iron Man, and it made more sense there because we at least see him seal up the wound. But
Hmm. No
so
blood, no nothing.
yeah, so Black Panther is not Wolverine. If he's not wearing a suit, he isn't bulletproof. He can be stabbed and killed like a normal human being. Like it gives him super strength and agility. That's all the herb does. Um, does not make this person like Wolverine to be able to just heal. And so like yeah, that we didn't even need to go that far. Like we could have found another way to injure Shuri so that the fight was more dramatic or whatever. I didn't like that we had to go that far and then like she's just fine. Like she just got stabbed in the stomach. It's fine. Like no, that
Yeah, that moment felt very cheap.
so cheap. Even worse that they went out of their way to like show her, you know, pulling herself off the thing and like if you can't
There's no
show blood,
blood.
yeah, what are you doing? What are you
That
doing?
staff is made of wood and it's clean, like totally clean. That's
Crystal
got to be
like
like the most egregious example of no blood in these movies.
that was painful. For all the wrong reasons. But yeah, so other than that, I mean, I would say like the action here is decent. I'm not in love with how it's shot and the editing of it, um, at least in some sections, but overall, it's solid. Soundtrack was beautiful.
The soundtrack, I'm not gonna lie, didn't stick out to me as much as it does watching the first movie. So like, I'm gonna in the second viewing have like a more keen ear out for it because a lot of it was enhancing the scenes, yes, but few of the tracks actually watching the movie stuck out as like, oh damn, that's nice. But I
Um,
love
the
Namor's
the
theme.
the the like chanty hypnotic thing
Yeah,
that they
that
do,
I
I thought was
loved. The
really
the
cool. Yeah.
siren, that
Hmm.
was great. Like that whole scene was really, really good.
Yeah, made them very scary and ominous and threatening. I thought that was great.
And like him, the ending that scene with him and like the lightning after he just took down that helicopter, like I there's another reality out there where we get the version of this movie where Namor does look silly and people can't buy into it, but he's just so cool in this movie.
Um, you say the soundtrack didn't stick out to you. I thought Shuri's theme when she actually puts the suit on was really cool.
You know,
When
yeah,
she
that did sound nice. I didn't think a ton about it. I might have to listen to that scene better at
it's
some point.
not, obviously it's not as like bombastic and like triumphant as T'Challa's, but there was like it's got this cool techno twinge to it. Like it's
Yeah.
hard to describe, but it was so cool. I really like that. Like when she shows up at M'Baku's kingdom, and everyone's like, "The Black Panther lives!" And yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah.
And M'Baku also was um he was great here. I really really like Winston Duke in this role. I, if I had this isn't even really a complaint because in a way it's kind of a compliment, but I wanted more of him. I wanted so much more of him.
Yeah. Give him like one more big scene to himself because like he's so good.
And I liked that he had a much he was more, I guess, empathetic and regal. Like, I mean, he's still him. Like his introductory scene when he's like chewing on the sausage or whatever it is.
It's a
Um,
carrot because he's a
yeah, it's
vegetarian,
the carrot.
remember?
Yeah, yeah. It was great. That's like classic M'Baku. Um, but then the other like more tender scenes when he's like trying to mentor Shuri and like
Hmm.
really treat Shuri as an equal. I'm like, this is a really great side to see to this character, and he's got this little moment in Infinity War that I really liked, where T'Challa says, "Thank you for standing with us," and he's like, "Of course, brother." Like we really see him take a shift, from that very first moment we're exposed to him in the first movie, to his interactions with T'Challa and like seeing him grow and having an influence on him to where he is now. And I think that says a lot about how T'Challa affected him. And
Yeah. And it's satisfying and fitting to see him basically take up leadership by the end.
yeah, I really like that we don't even entertain the idea that it makes sense for Shuri to be queen, and that's just not something she wants. It's not her.
And
And
she's not even if it was her, now is not the right time for her to do that emotionally.
no, she's she's grieving the loss of her brother and mother,
Yeah.
one of
Jeez.
which was murdered right in front of her.
Yeah, legit.
But yeah, man, all around, this is a very strong movie. Not perfect by any means, but I am comfortable saying I think I like this more than any other movie that we've had in Phase Four, and it's a close second with Shang-Chi because Shang-Chi was very new for me. Like I'd been exposed to him in a few Spider-Man comics. He popped up in some Spider-Man comics that I've read here and there, and I
Mm.
think maybe one or two Avengers. But yeah, that movie was a breath of fresh air. Felt very unique. Was very strong. Had some quibbles with how they handled the ending and killing Shang-Chi's father the way they did.
Mm.
But overall, those are definitely the two strongest movie in Phase 4 in my estimation.
Yeah. The thing about Shang-Chi for me is that again, it's got that thing where it just flows better and it's obviously not got the sort of like pervasive emotional feeling of this movie, but
Hmm.
I think some scenes in Shang-Chi are like the peak of this whole franchise as far as the emotional storytelling goes. And yeah, it's I don't know, like I feel like I'll be more comfortable like solidly ranking Wakanda Forever with everything else after I see it some more. But right now, it feels like such a like separate beast that makes it really hard. But yeah, I don't know. Do you want to say anything about the post credit scene before we sign out, or no?
Um, well, it's good that they did it. Because as we've talked about, like it's a very mixed, complicated issue, and you got some people saying like just recast them, and like I get that, I really do. I think this movie is the perfect bridge to assuage that. I do think in some shape or form they might do a massive time jump or find some way to age him up significantly, and we'll get either a very young adult or maybe even straight up adult Black Panther who still has all the history of what we've had before. So he's not just a variant like in some other universe with all this different storyline that we don't know about. Ugh. But
At the rate that the MCU tends to like pace out its story between movies, I don't even think we'll have to do a time jump. I think if we come, there's a chance that we might not come back to him, and like he and Nakia just get to live peacefully outside of like Wakanda and the monarchy, and not having to worry about
there's
all
no
that.
way we don't stick him in one of the next two upcoming Avengers movies.
I think that's I don't think he shows up in the next two. I think if he comes back, it'll be years from now when Letitia Wright has gone off and everyone else has like decided that they're not doing these movies anymore, and we've like fully closed off all the threads on our existing cast. Then we bring him back and he'll be like an older teenager, young 20 something. Like I really think I could be wrong, but I really think given Marvel's track record, like what we do with that is we just wait it out. Like we wait and see if this franchise survives long enough for that kid to not be a kid anymore, and if not, then he's off somewhere just hanging out.
I also wonder if they do another straight up sequel and if they keep um Letitia Wright Shuri as our Black Panther moving forward for another movie. Or if
Um,
maybe she's the Black Panther that we have in the upcoming Avengers movies. I don't know.
yeah, I think Shuri showing up in the Avengers movies is almost a given. Beyond that, I think what's likely for Wakanda and Talokan is that we get a lot of them showing up in other things like a couple of years down the road. Like I expect I don't know, I don't know how you do a direct sequel to this in the same way that this doesn't feel exactly like a direct sequel to the first movie. Like I feel like if we get another Black Panther slash Wakanda movie, it's gonna be another thing that feels very different and might as well just be its own thing. And I think insofar as like furthering these stories in the context of the rest of the MCU, I think we're gonna see a lot of Wakanda and Talokan and Namor and everything through the lens of other characters in between those things.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't have any super like major predictions for how we handle any of that stuff moving forward. Our next movie is Quantumania. We don't even have to wait too horribly long for that. So we'll see how they handle Kang and everything else.
That's February,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's nice to end this with a feeling of like, oh man, I don't know where they go from here. Like the possibilities are freaking endless.
And that this doesn't even feel like something that's going out of its way to set up for the larger MCU.
Absolutely not. Yeah. It feels like it's obviously not self-contained because it is following up on a story that we've been following already for a while, but it really is its own whole piece, and it doesn't feel like it's ever compromised by like the machine, like the Marvel machine. Like I'm usually the first person to be like, people make too big of a deal out of that. But this one really does feel like they're like, okay, let's take the universe that these characters exist in and let's be true to that, but also we're just gonna make our movie. And this is exactly the movie that everyone wanted to make. And it's just, love it.
Okay, yeah, I think this ended up being one of our shorter discussions, but I think we covered the movie pretty well.
Yeah, it's there's more stuff that you could dive into with like the themes and what exactly the movie's saying like politically, but I don't know. There's space to talk about that elsewhere. And right now, just initial thoughts. It's just I don't know. It all comes together pretty well. So yeah.
And this, well, before we sign off, I do want to talk about Shuri in particular and her arc. So, um, finding a way to bring back Killmonger, as I said, was such a coup, and it affects Shuri in a very interesting way because obviously she's expecting to either see her mother or her brother. And going into that scene, you can't see the brother for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
So it's just like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And then we see we see Killmonger, and the like the reasoning for that makes so much sense. Like she is not in, and from the very beginning, it's made clear she's very in her head about just focus on the work, focus on the tech, focus on like my niche thing that I'm good at that doesn't even necessarily have anything to do with the larger culture of Wakanda. Um, and her, Killmonger being an outsider and not really being tied to Wakanda outside of just what stories his father has told him. Uh, he's an outsider that's very vengeful, very angry, and as you said, just filled with rage. And because that's what she's connecting with the most before she goes under, he's who she ends up seeing, and she drives her whole country to feed what is a very very selfish, angry, and vengeful agenda. And it's not really about protecting anyone. Um, It's just about getting to this one person that wronged her so she can kill them. And
Yeah, it's
I,
it's great because it takes the nuance of Killmonger in the first movie and like underlines it and highlights it where like yeah, it makes sense and it's totally empathizable that Shuri and Eric and just everyone would be so angry at the world. But then we get to the scene with her and M'Baku and it's like what my mother wanted for me does not matter. She's dead. What matters is what I want. And it's like you can't dislike or even disagree with Shuri, but it's like you understand that you're being, like you said, really selfish right now. And like she is in that same sort of like cloudy haze that Killmonger was in. It's like your reasons for being angry make total sense, but you've got to stop and think about what this means for people who aren't you. And like at the last second she does, but she almost goes like fully down that Killmonger road.
yeah, and because it's not just her life she's risking, she's literally risking the lives of not even just everyone who's going on the mission with her, but everyone in Wakanda. Because if they fail, or even if they win and they kill Namor, the rest of his people are going to retaliate, and her people are not defenseless, but the majority of the fighters are already there. So it's like they go after the rest of the people that you have in Mbaku's kingdom, and it's like they're screwed.
Yeah, and it's It's okay, so I will talk about this briefly because that's the thing I think combined with the use of Ross is like the really interesting, sad, pointed commentary, like politically, which is this whole movie is just in microcosm something that happens all the time in real life, which is that, like, I'm not even going to say marginalized communities in this case, but like non white or like non colonial, non imperialist communities get like sort of scared, rightly so, by the idea of colonization, by the idea of having their culture threatened, and instead of directing their aggression to the people who are actually like an immediate threat, they get caught in like this game of cannibalizing each other. Is like, oh well, if you're not with me, then you must be with them. So I'm gonna take you out first. And it's like it's such a like avoidable, but it happens so often because it's like you don't know who to turn. You don't trust anyone in the world after you've been screwed over so many times. And it's like we end this movie and she's like, "What are we doing, man? Like you killed my mom, I'm trying to kill you. Why are we doing this in the first place? Like our two countries are just going to eat each other alive when we're not even each other's enemies. Like we're not the reason that we started this."
Uh, well, yeah, but the bigger reason she stops is because she finally sees her mother in the
Mhm.
plane, and she tells her to stop. And this
Oh, well,
isn't
it's not even on
really
the plane. It's like, oh, you mean the ancestral plane? I thought you meant on the
yeah,
plane,
the
like
ancestral
flying.
plane. She's in a hovercraft in the ancestral plane. Really great Wi-Fi in Wakanda.
But yeah, that moment was really powerful.
And really saved what I thought would have probably ended up being like a Last of Us 2 moment where I'm like, I'm not buying this turn. Like you did all of this to kill this one person, and then it's like, no, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah, it's well, again, I feel differently than you do about that scene in The Last of Us Part 2, but here it's much more easy to swallow because like they're almost polar opposites in sort of a way because The Last of Us Part 2 makes it really about like, okay, this is about me and there's like very personal things to what's it going to mean about me and how am I going to be able to live with myself and things that I regret not having done in my personal relationships. And all of it ties around this one act of violence. And like, is it going to be a bridge too far? Whereas Namor and Shuri, it's like they, they're not friends. Like, the beef is not squashed. And like, you don't know even what their next interaction could be like, but they're so completely aware of the world outside themselves, or at least Shuri is, that she's like, past a certain point, I gotta accept that my feelings kind of stop mattering on this issue. Where, like, with Ellie, it's like it's all about her feelings and how much her feelings matter to herself. And with Shuri, it's like, I've spent so long thinking about me and how I feel, and it's time to just take a deep breath and stop because I'm in charge of other people and they should not pay for my decisions right now.
Oh, when her mother, I think it's well, this scene works because like an actual physical, well, ethereal, spiritual manifestation of her mother is showing up and talking to her, talking her down, like asking her, show him who you really are. Like, are you the person that's going to murder somebody in cold blood out of vengeance, or are you the person who's going to show this person mercy, not because they deserve it, but to spare a needless war that's going
Mm-hmm.
to get more of your own people killed? Um,
Exactly. It's like you could read into it either way, but I think we're both reading into it less the show him who you are, like save your own soul, and more show him who you are, the person who, when push comes to shove, will put her country and innocent people before herself.
And with Ellie, we don't do enough to really communicate, to me anyway, um, her decision to just let Abby live after everything she's done. Counting aside all the people that you kill just in cutscenes, regardless of what you do in gameplay, um, like Ellie kills a lot of people just to get to Abby and kill her. And we do all these flashbacks to Joel, like she doesn't already know all this information, and it just doesn't make sense. Like,
I don't know. That doesn't bug me. Not to like end this discussion about this movie by talking about an unrelated video game, but like it works for me just because I don't know. Sometimes it's not a matter of information because it's like Ellie's not discovering anything new. She's just reflecting on a conversation that she had in a way that she hadn't reflected on it before, and like that happens to people all the time. So like in it's unfortunate because if she'd thought about it from that angle earlier, she would have avoided killing a lot of people who didn't need to be killed. But that's just kind of the way it shook out in the heat of the moment. She thinks about the last time that she and Joel really talked, and she's like, oh, well, I guess now that I think about it that way, it's probably not good for me to do this.
I don't even know in what way she is thinking about it. That's the problem. Like she doesn't all of that you have to infer, and it's not even really clear what you're supposed to be inferring. We're just given flashes of this conversation that she had.
I
And
think it's clear enough just because the conversation that she and Joel are having is about forgiveness. And yeah, the thing is that game is kind of in a tough spot because I don't know how you write that into the scene without it feeling super clunky. But
yeah,
like
yeah, it would feel clunky if like there was just like random voiceover, or
where if
if
she started like explaining herself to Abby,
yeah, that would be icky. But I don't know.
I
That
get
that
what you
that
mean, but like it landed for me in the moment.
but yeah, this everything about this works, sans her getting stabbed and then just walking away from it like she's Wolverine. Um, but yeah, I really liked Shuri's arc. I like that we took her down a dark path, um, and that we took her in a direction by the end that made sense. Like and I like that we're doing this more with heroes, where it's like, because we just did this with Tom Holland Spider-Man in No Way Home. Like he was going to kill Green Goblin, and the only
Yeah,
reason he didn't is because you know Tobey Maguire's Peter stopped him. And I like seeing these characters become more and more fallible instead of less.
yeah.
I think that's really interesting as we continue this franchise.
And
Um,
like in a franchise where we've had most of our characters, we've gotten a little bit better about it now, but where most of our characters have been pretty fine just killing people, I like that we've made a point of like getting the ones who aren't cold-blooded murderers up to that line so that we can like have that discussion of like, okay, why don't we want our characters to just be cold-blooded murderers?
well, I mean, you say that. Um, I I mean that's kind of true for Iron Man, but with Cap, he's a soldier. Like you're literally, it's like literally a job. Like that's what you
Yeah.
do. Like
Like
you
Cap's a soldier, Thor was like raised in a warrior culture. Hulk
mhm.
just has no qualms about it. Like a lot of the characters prior to Phase 4 were kind of like for Widow and Hawkeye, it's just their job. They kind of just killed people as a matter of course. And like that's fine. I really don't have any issues with that in principle, but I like the sort of more nuanced direction that we're taking it now, which is that we've got a lot more characters in Phase 4 who are not so cool with killing people, and when they get up to that line, we're doing it for a story reason. Like we have something to say with that, and it's not just this character is suddenly all right with killing people and we're just going to gloss over it.
Yeah, I think it was handled very very well here, and it's great because it allows you to still keep these villains around and do more with them later. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't love, um, this very weird, quirky take that they were doing on Abomination and She-Hulk, but at least they had the option to bring him back and do something with him.
Yeah, at
Uh,
least he got to be a character who did
yeah, because when we started out early on in a lot of these like pre-MCU movies, we just would kill every villain, like most of Raimi's films. Um, well, I think yeah. So in Fantastic Four, they actually kept Doctor Doom alive. Um, but I'm thinking, oh yeah, and in the Wolverine, not Wolverine, in the X-Men movies, Magneto's the one that we always keep alive. But we 9 times out of 10 end up killing every other major threat.
Yeah,
Even though we didn't kill the guy who was making the Sentinels.
the Trask. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, we didn't kill him. But yeah, I'm just superhero movies were kind of in that growing pains era, so it's cool that we're like learning from that and don't kill this guy. We can use him later. You know.
and we can make a point with our story by not just treating characters as disposable. Who knew? But yeah, that's all I've got to say for now. We'll see what, if any, thoughts change or get added once I've seen it a second time tomorrow. But yeah, unless you've got anything else to add, then I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Let us know what you guys think of the movie in the comments.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for listening.